Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for the Property Marketing Lounge, our first one of 2022. I'm going to be talking today about the results from the Property Marketing Survey. We did this survey about a year ago, and actually it was the results from the survey that gave us the idea to launch the Property Marketing Lounge, because there was so much to talk about and we're still finding things to talk about a year on. But we thought it was a good time to sense check where we are and what things have changed in the past year, having gone through such a tumultuous time. But this time we're going to have a little bit of a different format, because Ayo is going to take the reins and host this session, because Deenie and I couldn't stay quiet any longer, basically, and have been desperate to be panelists on our own webinar. So yes, thank you all, and thank you so much, especially to our sponsors, Aparto, who have kindly sponsored the session today, and without them this session wouldn't be possible. So huge thank you for their support as well. There will be details of everything, all the links that you need to know, and our sponsors in the chat. If you've got any questions to ask, then please add them to the Q&A, and Ayo will keep an eye on those and make sure that we do answer those questions. We can't guarantee that we will check the chat box during the session, so Q&A is where you need to post all your questions. I'm going to be quiet now. I'm going to pass over to Ayo to introduce the other panelists and get us going with some questions.
Hi everyone, so my name's Ayo Abbas. I am a built environment marketing consultant. I've worked in the kind of property, real estate and kind of built environment sector for around 20 years, which is quite a long time now. So I'm now a consultant working for mainly engineers at the moment. So I'm doing lots with people like Arup and WSP and people like that. So in the session, and I'm really happy to be the host today, so thanks so much Sarah and Deenie. I was just going to quickly run around the panelists and just ask you all to give yourselves a quick intro to who you are, what you do, where you come from. So do you want to kick off? I'm going to start with Deenie.
Oh, I forgot that I had to introduce myself, and then you started with me. I was like, oh no. So I'm Deenie Lee, for those that don't know me. I'm one half of the Property Marketing Strategists. I spent my career for the last few years in student accommodation. Prior to that, I've been in education, and I really enjoy marketing and I enjoy strategic marketing. And I guess what I really love working with Sarah is that we're really trying to really change the way we think about marketing and how marketing can add value to a business. And it's great to do these surveys and get these results and be able to action and make change with them. So, and it's great to have our panelists to chat that with today.
Awesome intro. So I'm going to go over to Matt.
Hello, thanks, Ayo. Yeah, I'm Matt Halfpenny. I'm the co-owner of two recruitment businesses that exclusively recruit to the residential living sectors. So we've got Red Penny and Partners, which is a senior appointments and talent advisory business, and the property recruitment company, which recruits at a kind of operational site level based for all the markets we're going to be talking about today. So yeah, I'm coming in with a bit of a talent and engagement and recruitment perspective on the sort of marketing world, really.
Awesome, thanks so much. On to you, Tara.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Yeah, Tara is my name, head of marketing for Aparto across our UK and Irish assets. So I look after 14 residents to support leasing, brand awareness, drive our leasing strategy, our occupancy levels, and also have delivered over the last 2 years that I've been with Aparto a thriving customer experience and wellbeing program, which is shaped on our 5 key pillars and has gone from strength to strength. Obviously, very unusual year, starting a career in student housing in the middle of a pandemic, but we were able to pivot our customer experience program, housing nearly 320 virtual events over the space of 7 to 8 months. So yeah, delighted to be here and looking forward to chatting all things marketing.
320 events is highly impressive.
Yeah.
It's a lot of Zoom as well, right?
A lot of Zoom, a lot of bake-alongs, it was brilliant though. All to support our residents, so.
Fantastic. And over to you, Sarah.
I've got to come up with something that Deenie didn't say, so thanks for coming to me last. So I am the other half of the Property Marketing Strategists. I've been working in student accommodation for 13 years and overall property for nearly 20 years, all in marketing. So I've seen very, very different times, very different sectors within that. And I started my own consultancy a few years ago, but have really kind of grown to develop, I guess, a particular angle, being sort of the marketing strategy side of things alongside Deenie. So whilst we forged a lot of our careers around kind of functional marketing and doing the marketing, actually where we've seen the benefit is by supporting businesses as part of the consultancy, by really getting under the skin of marketing, and working with them to build out their strategy and support their existing marketing departments. So yeah, that's where we are at the moment.
Fantastic. So I'm just going to kick off a bit and just talk about the actual survey itself. So it's the Property Marketing Survey. It's the second year it's taken place, isn't it, Sarah? And I guess it's mainly UK based. And in terms of the kind of respondents, they mainly reported into CEOs, and mainly, I guess, from the kind of student accommodation kind of sector, in terms of, I guess that's who you work with, isn't it, Sarah and Deenie? So it's that kind of realm. And in terms of the final report and the findings, they'll be shared shortly, so they're not available as yet. But if you sign up on their website, you'll be one of the first to get it when it's launched. So just so you have some background to the survey and understand how it works, because I asked that when I started. So, and if you have any questions as we're going along, please do put your questions in the Q&A function, as Sarah said, and then we can kind of tackle those as we're going along with the conversation. So, in terms of the kind of, I guess let's start the debate. I guess for me, I was actually listening to the radio earlier, and there's a lot of talk about the Great Resignation and what's going on. And I also had a conversation this morning, also talking about marketing roles out there. So before we kind of get really into the survey itself, are there more roles at the moment, or are they kind of existing? Are they new roles, or are they just replacing people? What do you reckon, Matt?
Oh, I knew you were going to put me on the spot, being the recruiter on the panel. Honestly, it's a real mixture. I would say that it's obvious that there was some pent up demand during COVID. I think there were a lot of people that put a pause on expanding teams if they didn't need to at that time. So there is an element of the people are feeling a lot more confident. Restrictions are easing sort of week by week, it seems, at the moment. So there's an element of that. I would say, having spoken to a lot of the clients that we typically do in January, because we want to understand about what their plans are over the next 12 months for hiring, there has been a spike in people deciding coming into this year, things starting to open up again, that they are making decisions to move on. Some are looking to stay within the sectors that we operate in. Some, if I'm honest, have had a really tough experience on the front line, particularly at property management level in residential, and have decided that maybe it doesn't fit in with their work-life balance that they're looking for anymore. So we're getting a real mixture. I think you sometimes got to be a little bit too wary of the media buzzwords, and actually, is it a great resignation, or are people just demanding more from their current employers in terms of training, development, and that kind of culture piece? So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. It's a bit of a balance at the moment. New hires and people maybe looking for a change of scenery.
How are you finding it on the ground, Tara?
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate what Matt said there. Yes, there's a lot of marketing roles out there, but I think if your company culture is extremely strong and really supportive, obviously you've been working from home for nearly the last 2 years. And I think once you inspire your team, they won't look further afield. I think it's really about upskilling and training and development. So that's what I would, bring to the table. I think also with the pandemic, it's about adapting to that sort of change within your marketing team. How can you inspire your team to really, develop them? What can you offer different senior roles within the team? So yeah, that's what I would think.
And as consultants, Sarah, I mean, how are you finding it when you're kind of working with inside businesses, and what are you seeing on the ground?
We're seeing a there's still quite a lack of senior marketing leadership, and I think we'll come on to that later in the discussion. So I think what we're probably seeing with the recruitment out there is probably a lot of functional marketing roles, a lot of the doers, which is great to see, because it means that marketing is being prioritized, and there's obviously a clear uplift in marketing activity. I guess where we're still seeing the shortages is the senior marketeers around the board table, the people that can really impact the strategy within a business. And that's kind of where we come in with our business as well, because we believe that marketing doesn't just sit in the marketing department. Marketing sits across the whole business, which is very difficult to do unless you've got the knowledge and the experience. So I think I can see that there's a question about whether it's the great resignation or the great transition, and I think that's a really interesting conversation, because are all of these people leaving vacancies because there's no senior roles for them to move into, and no sort of career succession, and then it comes back to what Tara was talking about, the company culture and development opportunities within those roles. So is that why there's a transition, or if there isn't any senior marketers at all, then there's nowhere for them to go, so they'll go to other industries.
Do you think there's a lot of people leaving the industry, Matt? I'm going to ask you that question.
I would say, actually, in terms of so the markets we serve they're quite broad in terms of like residential, but if I look at some of the more emerging markets, so you look at kind of build to rent, PRS, co-living, and I'd still include student accommodation in that, compare that to say traditional block management. I actually think engagement in those sectors is still relatively high. I think people are quite proud to work in those sectors. We're doing a survey at the moment, and the early data suggests actually motivation is still quite good in those sectors. There's a lack of training and development going on, which gives me concern for the future that goodwill could fizzle out. I would say in some of the more traditional block management, resident, property block management type roles, that there is a bit more disengagement in those sort of sectors. So I think overall the feeling's pretty good right now, but I would say that if companies aren't looking at longer term succession planning, that could change quite quickly this year, is my overall view on it.
Brilliant. I was going to say, because in the survey there was one of the questions was, is marketing a board level position in your organisation? And there were only 35% of them said yes, which I think is a huge kind of disparity. So I can imagine if you can't see where you're going to be able to go, why are you going to stay where you are? And is that something you're coming across a lot?
Yeah, what I find fascinating is if I look at some of the newer entrants that I've supported, so new clients that have got new capital, they're building a brand, they're building a new offering, and they're going up against more established property management companies. So whether this is build to rent, student, PRS, okay, it doesn't really matter. I would actually say that a lot of those co-founders, CEOs are looking to bring in marketing director level positions quite quickly on the roadmap. So there's some encouraging signs there, because I think they recognize they do need to stand out. They need to be able to sell their proposition to investors, as well as trying to tap into potentially a new demographic. And they're typically actually quite young entrepreneurial businesses. They've got experience and they want to go out on their own and set up a new platform. Great. I would say, I think some of the more established brands maybe that didn't see it very important 10, 15 years ago, potentially still don't see it important enough now. So I still find it fascinating it's not 100% at the board level. I think it's crazy in a uber competitive environment, in an ever-changing landscape in terms of resident demands and needs and look and feel of buildings, all of that kind of stuff. It really should be a board level position at every single propco, in my opinion. So there's a long way to go, but newer entrants, I think, are starting to get on board of that journey a bit quicker than others, is my view.
What do you think of in terms of how more traditional firms are, I guess, seeing that CMO role and what you're having to go in and try and do when you're working with them?
That's me. I think I think it's really interesting what Matt was saying, and I think that's really good that that newer firms are starting to see this.
Yeah.
And I guess what I get frustrated at is that, I guess one of the things that we talk to clients about, it's not necessarily, it's having that marketing mindset that I think is really important on the board. And if you don't have that, and you can't understand that point from a customer, and you can't understand how to communicate certain things, whether it's to internal staff or whether it's to customers, you're missing a massive trick. And I think that's the bit that when you don't have that senior person on that board, you're never going to get. And it might not necessarily always be a CMO, it might be a CEO that's come from a marketing background. But if you haven't got someone with that mindset, then you're missing a massive chunk of how you can add that value. Yeah. And that is the bit that I get really frustrated with, is that it's not just about the transactional, can I sell my product? It's, can I sell my product, and can I make sure those decisions made at that level are going to make sure I can still sell my product, or I can still engage people in my brand, or I can still engage people in my business. And I think that's what we're really trying to get across to the sector about those added value bits that someone at that level can bring.
And finally to you, Tara, how's the structure working at Aparto?
Yeah, so in terms of Aparto, so we're powered by Hines Real Estate, and we have 3 on the marketing team. So there's myself, which heads up the head of marketing for UK and Ireland. We've got recently hired a marketing exec, and then we also have an overall graphic designer, and we work really closely as well with the digital agency to support our digital side of things. So that's how we work at the moment. But I think what's really important with Hines powering Aparto is that we really have that one family mindset. So we have that really close collaboration. Like this morning, I'm over in London for a strategy day. Finally, things are going back to normal, and it's really, these are the days that we can kind of put our ideas forward, whether it's design, whether it's talking about our demographic, because at the end of the day, that's where where our customer is. It's talking about our demographics. And I think it's so important that we have that place at the table in terms of where we are.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So moving on, so in terms of the survey, so one of the questions was, who does marketing report into? So we've already said there's not that many CMOs. So actually 29% of marketers actually are reporting into operations. Is that the right place that it should be, Sarah?
Yeah, we were quite keen to see the responses to this. I know personally, when I've worked in organisations and there's been a restructure and marketing has ended up reporting to operations, quite often the operations director will turn around and go, I don't know anything about marketing, a bit kind of blasé and flippantly. And what that means is that effectively the direction isn't there. So you might have a marketing manager or a head of marketing, but effectively if that operations director or COO doesn't have the knowledge and the experience to bring those kind of mid-level marketing managers along with them, then that's as far as their career will go. And it's marketing and operations work so closely together. It's intrinsically linked, but it's not the same. And marketing can bring such a different kind of angle to operations if they work together. But we see it all the time that there's space at the table for both, and it's often very, very quick that it's marketing. In what company would the operations director get made redundant and operations work for marketing? It doesn't happen that way around, but for some reason it seems to work the other way around, where marketing ends up answerable to operations. Like I said, they should work together, but it's not the same thing, and you lose a whole layer of expertise and knowledge without that.
Fantastic. And in terms of kind of who we report into, I guess if people are reporting to ops, in terms of skills and development, are there things that they can do to kind of bring themselves on, Deenie?
Well, I think that's one of the other challenges that we find in the sector, and we did ask some questions about, is that there isn't any really kind of clear training that they can go to that directs to property, or there isn't any, other than us, there's not that clear kind of route to say, well, actually, I can go and learn from this, or I can go and learn from that. And I think that's often the challenge, that obviously you are mentored by the people that are in your business, but how do you get that innovation in? How do you get new ideas in? And I think that is something that as a sector, the marketing should be considered in that. I think it's considered in lots of other areas in the business, but I don't think anyone ever thinks about, what do our marketeers need? How do we get our marketeers to go out and learn more about this sector? And I think often it's because they're the creative people, it's expected that they'll just be creative, but you need to feed that creation. and I think that's a real shame that, you know, if you're not reporting into someone that can see that and understand that, then it can create difficulties.
It works the other way around as well, though, doesn't it? Because, you know, we've worked where there's been super talented marketeers. I've had an amazing teams of people working for me that have come through every single marketing qualification, way more qualified than I am in marketing, but they don't know anything about the industry. And you've got to really, really understand the industry to be able to market it, I think. And, you know, that involves people having to spend time and effort and sometimes money getting people to understand it. I mean, we, you know, some of us were at the Property Week Student Accommodation Conference. You know, I can probably count on one hand, and 3 of us are here, how many marketeers were actually there. And, you know, it's not targeted at marketeers, and actually by sending your marketeers there, they'll learn so much more about the industry than potentially the acquisitions and development team, who seem to get sent there year upon year, who kind of know what's going on because they're part of that circle all the time. So there's a real gap, I think, in development and kind of knowledge sharing. Like Deenie said, it's kind of, marketeers are quite often put in a box of, you know, the creative department, but they need to be inspired, they need to be passionate about the industry. And you know, I'm all for marketeers not sitting behind a screen. You know, get out and about, walk the street, put your trainers on and go and see the product, go and see the places that we're marketing. But again, this comes back to the lack of kind of senior leadership, because junior marketeers without that permission might feel that they can't do that. We would love more marketeers to tune into this lounge series, to be honest, but we wonder if they're sat at their tables maybe not having that leadership and permission to be able to ask, or confidence to be able to say, I'm taking an hour out of my day to expand my knowledge and experience. And there's so much out there, but you've kind of, it's self-fulfilling, really. You've got to have the confidence and the knowledge and the experience to be able to do it yourself. But if you're not, then who's bringing that to you? You know, who's saying to the marketeers, we'd love you to go to this event, or please can you tune into this webinar, it will really help your learning.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that, Sarah, because one of the kind of key KPIs I set for the new marketing executive that started with myself is get out to site. You know, they need to see the product. If they don't know what the product is, it's going to be so difficult for them to market it. Get to know our customer, who are we selling to? And then in terms of operations, we would work very much cross collaboration with our head of operations, because at the end of the day, if we're not working with our operations, how are we to know how the buildings are running? And then also we work really closely with our general managers as well on site, and making sure that they know what's going on with the marketing campaigns, and also from an operations point of view, we know as a marketing team what's going on and what's new in the building. And yeah, so
Tara, as you kind of moved into the sector, 2 years ago or so from fashion, how did you learn about the sector, and is that what you did, or how do you get your inspiration?
Well, would you believe, actually, when I started doing filling out my CAO, which would be the A level side of things for the UK, I had actually put property economics down many moons ago. So it was interesting that I started in the student accommodation world. But you know what? I think from a marketeer, all of our skills are extremely transferable. And what I was so excited about was bringing my network into the Aparto, on my Aparto journey, really. And as I mentioned at the start, we hosted 320 virtual events across the space of 6 to 8 months. You name it, we've done in terms of events, but to support our students' well-being. But I think what's really important is any sort of marketing career you go into is really bringing your network on your journey, and really bringing your skills, seeing how you can adapt to change. And yeah, just really embracing everything. You know, I started in January 2020 in the student living sector, so two months on the ground, and then it was literally March 2020 hit, and we were all behind a desk at home, working from home. But I think if you've got a really kind of strong team that are there and are there to support you, and you're there to support them, I think that would be the one kind of key tip I would give for moving into student accommodation.
Fantastic. No, that's really good advice. So, I mean, let's move on slightly in terms of marketing. So what's one of the questions talked about the role of marketing in the team. And it was quite interesting, the kind of disparity or kind of the difference between what marketers thought we do and what non-marketers thought we do. So in terms of marketers, we kind of think our most important part is building and maintaining brand reputation, understanding the product and customer trends, and then pricing strategies. But what was interesting was that non-marketers thought it was more about on that kind of supporting the product development side, brand development as well. So why do you think there's that kind of ambiguity or that difference, Sarah?
Communication. Okay, what we found and what we'll be sharing with you all is this kind of hierarchy of what marketeers think they're in position to do and what senior business leaders think marketeers are there to do. And it is a different order, which means if that's going on, then it means that the value of the marketeers is not being felt, or the impact in the right areas isn't being felt, which has got to come down to communication. So there's one of two things going on, really. I think the marketeers are probably maybe not shouting about what they're doing and showing what they're doing, which means that the value isn't being seen and felt. But also the business leaders are maybe not engaging the marketeers in the whole business enough for them to understand what they can do to add value. And again, this probably comes back to the senior leadership side of things as well, because you need to be part of those conversations, I think. And I've been in the industry an awfully long time, and I've always been quite confident of being around other departments and other teams, and I've had no problem in saying, oh, that sounds interesting, I think I'll come along to that meeting, or what was that you were talking about, that sounds like something that I want to be involved in. And if you haven't got a senior marketeer doing that, then the rest of the marketing team aren't going to know what's going on and be able to kind of identify priorities, really. And maybe this is why there is leakage within the industry because of that disparity. I mean, in an ideal situation, when we do this survey again in another year's time, we want it to be aligned, and we've done it twice in 2 years in a row now, and it's still not aligned. So there's still a problem between expectations. Matt, to your point earlier, it could be about promises and job roles, and actually what people have signed up to do isn't actually what they're doing. Training and development, that's got to be a big part of maybe why marketers are doing one thing and the business leaders think they should be doing something else, because they don't have the information or the skill set to be able to do it. And
I think access.
Sorry, you go on, Dean.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say, I think access is one of the issues that we always talk about, is that you need to have access. And I think maybe one of the questions we should put in this survey is to those senior managers that say that supporting product development is the one thing they want their marketers, main thing they want their marketers to do, is when's the last time you actually invited them to a product meeting, and then see how many yeses we get to that question. Because I think that's the thing, we can all have these ideas in our head about, well, this is what a marketing team should do, but unless you're directing them on that level or giving them access to that information, they can't do it. And then there becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy that, oh, my marketing team don't do that, but they would do that if they're given the access to it. And I think it's understanding that level of access.
And I think, just to add to that, I think the answer to that question kind of sum up some of the industry-wide problems we've got over the perception of a property management company. There's so much hype put around new building, new campaign, launch, lease up, as in that's the big marketing drive. We've all got to gear all hands to the pump on that. There's a huge role in marketing for that. Building might still be within the property management company's portfolio for another 5, 6, 7 years longer. There's this ongoing marketing piece. And I think when you get to operational level, building manager, and even senior operational people, no wonder they're a bit like, well, no, actually, that's kind of my job now, is to keep the residents happy once they're there. You know, the marketing guys are just about getting us some few people through the doors in the lease up. So it's breaking down that myth. It's an ongoing 360, really crucial part of running a successful, you know, operating company within property. But I think the terminology sometimes needs to shift a little bit from this, you know, the great lease up and then it's operational, so it's stabilized, I don't need to be involved in this anymore. I think it needs to change.
But I think even from a customer experience point of view, Matt, obviously you still have to, as a marketeer, bring that customer experience. If somebody's come to book at, let's say, Aparto, you still have to support them on their journey. It could be 1 year, it could be 4 years. So it's also the retention side of things as well.
Yeah, I think we see quite a lot of marketing teams being given tasks. You know, can you just do this email campaign? Can you just put this on Facebook? And that's not giving them any strategic insight, any you know, leverage to do their jobs, you know, properly. So, you know, it's a bit, you know, what Deanie said is that, you know, asking marketeers to do those very functional tasks, which they're probably excellent at, isn't the full job, and it's not going to help them develop the product and develop pricing strategies and become, you know, a strategic part of the team. That's just doing some very sort of surface level you know, tasks basically.
Fantastic. So we just had another question. So actually coming back to pricing, so is there anything that we can do as marketeers to get more involved in the strategy? I'm going to ask you that question, Deanie.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a big saying, which we probably need to put on our website somewhere because we say it all the time, is don't stay in your lane. Like, it's just elbow your way in and go to those meetings and get into those opportunities, because you can add that value once you're in there, and just don't take no for an answer. And I think that is, if you haven't got that senior leadership on your team, that we always has a responsibility as marketers to raise awareness of the role of strategic marketing. But if you're fighting to get there, just keep pushing. And I'm hoping that the work we're doing is making those doors easier to open. But you know, as I say, I think there's so much to learn from just being in the room and having that voice of your customer in the room. And I think you know, and influence is a really important skill to learn, and it's something that I learned very early on in my career, about being able to communicate and influence people in different ways and influence on their level. And I think learning that as a skill as a marketeer should be a given, but that should also be used not just for your customers and for your marketing, but also for your senior management, because you can influence and develop them if you focus on the things that they're interested in, which is the bottom line and growth and you know, getting bookings where they need to be. So I think talk to them on their level, and you can get yourself in the room. So.
I was going to say, what 3 doors, which I think is kind of what you've done, what 3 doors should you be knocking on? So is that the kind of growth, the kind of financial meetings?
Exactly, I think, yeah. And I've had loads of conversations in my career around, you know, when you're talking about social aspects or residential life, is that, you know, investors largely aren't going to be caring about the details of that, but what they care about is that by doing those things makes your asset far more valuable for your customer, which means actually you get more revenue. You've got to take them on that journey to that step, because if you don't do that, then they're just going to say, well, that's just costing me money, and you know, that's impacting my bottom line. So, you know, you've got to sell them the story, which is the story that they want to hear.
And I think even that comes into play even with the social spaces. So design and development is really important to be at those sort of meetings where possible, because obviously at the end of the day, if we're developing a space and the customer end user isn't going to be using the space, there's no point in putting it in. And obviously when we get that data in terms of feedback from students, what they actually want, I think that's really important. I know Matt mentioned, you know, social space at the start of this. It's so important for student living to make sure that we put in those spaces that actually add value and actually the customer will use. I think from a marketing perspective, that we're putting our input in there.
Yeah, I think Tara's right. I think, you know, that side of the strategy is really important. And marketing and operations are the only people that can bring that to the table. So if you can elbow your way into the right meetings and have the conversations with the right people, bring it back to data. If you're suddenly telling people, well, we know that that's a great idea, or we know that that's that's going to work because we've asked the customer, then that leverages you on a strategic level. That will make people listen to you and make you be respected. And I think a lot of the time, and God, it's been so difficult with being remote for the last couple of years. When we're talking about people knocking on doors and elbowing their way into meetings that have been virtual, but all you need to do is ask. I think that a lot to be said that if you're asking directors and board level senior leaders, oh, I've noticed in your diary that you've got this meeting, or I've spoken to your PA and she said that you're having a meeting about this. Can I come and just listen? You don't have to take part and you don't have to be part of the meeting, but just to understand what's going on. And I know we're going to go on to talk a little bit about internal communications. But that's a big part of it as well. I won't steal Ayo's thunder by asking the questions, but that's kind of one of the links really between marketing and the rest of the business that's really important.
So actually, one of the questions, going back to what you were earlier said about the research, so one of the questions was, do you believe there is enough research currently undertaken on product development and what customers in the future may want? And it was 58% of the respondents actually said no, which I kind of think ties in with what you're kind of saying, is that people aren't necessarily doing that as much as they could. Are there things that people could be doing to kind of get more research done, or something to do it more quickly or more regularly to help they kind of inform their kind of marketing approach? Anything they could be doing quickly?
I think definitely now being able to go back out onto site is so important. Obviously, let's say there's a building that's been there for 4 years, actually going in and asking the residents what spaces are they use the most, what do they feel that maybe we could introduce, and then obviously that'll shape the next development, the next design in some way. I think it's just always trying to change that design, adding different value to the new design and the development, and making sure that the customer at the end of the day, if you're going to put in this social space, that it's actually going to be used.
I mean, when you've gone in, I mean, is it often that some of these spaces aren't used, or they're not used as people originally envisaged? Is that what it is, or is it just that a property been there for 4 years, so people use it in a completely different way?
So, for instance, to give you an example, in one of our new buildings in Dublin called the Loom, we introduced a new study pod rather than the larger study spaces, because we had a lot of our students just asking for that smaller space. Yeah. And then we had phone calls asking, could they change it to, could they use it? So it's quite a versatile space. I think if you put in these, suppose these pods or blanket spaces, actually gives the student a versatile space. They can nearly make it their own. I think that's a new concept we've introduced in Aparto, whether it's a content space, whether it's a TikTok space, whether it's one of the new things is we're asked for karaoke booths, but just obviously making sure if you are, head of marketing or senior marketing, that you try and, I suppose, Deenie, you mentioned that word, influence, wherever possible, that we as marketeers can really put our influence and our footprint on that development and design stage, because at the end of the day, we know the customer, we know what works, and obviously working really closely with your managing directors and also the operations team and asset management.
Fantastic. I'm just like, a TikTok space. Wow.
I mean, it's as simple as that, though, isn't it? It's just asking the customer, and from a marketing point of view, it can be a full research project, full survey. It does need time, money, and resource though to do it properly. But on a really kind of micro level, our teams are on social media all the time. I managed to resolve a very quick debate about L-shaped sofas a few years ago, but just by doing a poll on Facebook and proving my MD wrong. But it wasn't enough to just say, oh, we're just gonna bring in L-shaped sofas across the board. But it was enough to go, oh, hold on a minute. The audience is thinking something different to what we thought, and that was enough to kind of prompt a bit more research and a bit of more consideration into the product. Most people in this industry can't say that they're the target audience. I'd love to say that was true, but it's just not. And if any of us working in student accommodation, the weird thing about our jobs is that our target audience stays the same age and we get older. So, the whole time we're getting further and further and further away from our target group, and we can't guess what they think. God, TikTok rooms, I don't even know what that is. So, you have to ask young people what they want, but also be able to adapt, because a TikTok room today isn't what the students in 3 years' time might want. So you've got to keep asking and keep delving into it. Otherwise, our product will just get stale and we won't be able to market it anyway.
All right, is a TikTok room just a room, or is there anything special?
It's a content space, so it's a study space that can be actually versatile. So it really is what the student wants it to be. I think that's what's really nice about this new concept that we've brought into the Loom. I suppose we're also expanding into Italy and Spain, and we are introducing swimming pools into our Polaris residents. So that'll be interesting to see now in September 22 in Italy and Spain.
Hey, or they're going, I want to be a student right now. So anyway, kind of moving on a bit from here and the lovely product and what's going on there. In terms of, I guess we've all had 2 years of lockdown, no lockdown, and COVID. So one of the questions asked in the survey, which was introduced this year, was who's responsible for internal communications in your business? And it kind of falls between kind of HR, marketing, everyone. So it's kind of one of those where nobody really owns it. Are you seeing a rise in kind of internal comms roles, Matt?
Not really a kind of area that I specialise in, so I can't give a real sort of strong opinion on that particular thing. But what I would say, internal communication in general within a business, sharing of communication throughout is definitely very important to people that work in the company. And we talked, linking back to this Great Resignation piece at the beginning, businesses that now are at the forefront of that. Let's face it, with what happened with COVID, there's no excuse not to be communicating with people. We all had to do it on a very regular basis, albeit remotely. As we transition back into a world where it's out and about again, and there could be those silos where everyone's back in their buildings, some are down in Bristol, head offices in London. That kind of importance of bringing everyone together still and communicating everything that's going on, the good, the bad, the indifferent, is going to be absolutely crucial. So I can't speak of who's controlling that narrative, but it's important that it's being done in the right way.
Deenie, if you've got anything to add to that, or who you think is controlling the kind of internal narrative now, what's happening?
I think I've got a lot to say about it. I think it's a massive, I'll keep it, but I think it's a massive forgotten strand of marketing. Ultimately, if you can't market and engage your own teams in the product and what you're trying to sell, then you can't do it externally. So the frustration within the property sector is that by its very nature, it's full of satellite sites. You don't have all your team in one space that you can communicate easily with, like pre-COVID. So we should have been really good at it beforehand anyway. And I think we are, as a sector, still relatively poor. And it's just vitally important. And I think, as we move down this route of flexible working, it's only going to get vitally more important. And, that internal brand and that engagement of who you are as a business and your purpose of business needs to be as strong as it is internally as it is externally. And the first people that are going to call you out for saying one thing externally and one thing internally is going to be staff. So it's so important that we should, if we don't have dedicated internal comms resources, we should have someone or a group of people in the business that are responsible for that internal comms. And I think it's very important.
Have you got anything to add to that, Sarah, in terms of internal comms?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think one thing that might be maybe a misconception is what internal comms is, and I think that might be why it quite often sits with HR. I've worked in businesses where internal comms means make sure you clean the kitchen after you've used it, and the Christmas party is on this date at this time. And we're not really talking, that sounds really flippant, I'm really sorry, HR people. That's not really what we're talking about. It's more this is going on in the business, and this is our growth trajectory, and this is how we're going to get there. and we had an amazing meeting the other day and this was the outcome, and guess what, so and so MD is a speaker at this, you know, at this event, and, you know, make sure you're supporting. It's those kind of things that bring the rest of the business on the journey, and the culture piece. I worked for a client last year who didn't have this in place, and it wasn't my responsibility to be part of it, and a big thing kicked off on Twitter that was really bad, that questioned inclusion and diversity of this business. And they just brushed it under the carpet after it happened, and I was fighting for someone to make an announcement to the business internally about what had happened, why it had happened, and what we'd learned from it. Because my concern was that there were people in the business who could have been quite offended by what had happened and been quite concerned that they worked for a business that had acted in this way. Nothing, just swept it under the carpet, never to be mentioned again. And that's the real danger of not having an internal comms person or someone leading internal comms, is that you're missing the whole engagement of the business, and there's fragments of the business that are excluded. And like Deanie said, you know, there's so many businesses that are fragmented anyway and remote, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So, you know, communications is absolutely key. And, you know, we're talking about how marketeers can become more strategic, how they can get more involved. Kind of feels like internal comms is that thread that keeps it all together, that can make that possible. But yeah, in the survey, it was largely 50-50 between HR and marketing. We think it sits with marketing. It would be really great, actually, if anyone's watching kind of from HR, that to kind of have that debate, really. And I think from our point of view, we don't really care who it sits with, as long as it sits somewhere at the moment, because it's mainly not, and it's really falling between the gaps.
Do you think it should be a standalone role, Sarah?
I do.
Yeah,
I think it should be part of marketing, but I think it should be a specialized role, you know, because I don't think, you know, I work with a lot of young marketeers who are going through marketing degrees, and I don't see it being part of any of their course. You know, and it's not something that we see comes up in people's experience when they're applying for roles. So I think unless it's a specialized role, it might not be a skill that somebody comes to, you know, to the role with.
I think it's, I was just going to say, I think it's a very much a blended approach, the internal comms side of things. For instance, I would work really closely with our corporate comms and PR teams when it comes to awards or any sort of news updates. But then in terms of the marketing side of things from an internal comms perspective, I would very much deliver the content for what's going on in the business, retention campaigns, brand awareness campaigns, and then also our operations would deliver internal comms for the side of health and safety operations or any sort of news updates within the residents. So I would really think it's quite a blended approach.
Okay. I've actually had a question just come in anonymously, which was a similar question, but around brand. Should brand be part of marketing or a standalone role? That's an interesting one. Who wants to go?
So it's probably quite relevant for Deanie at the moment, because she's helping a client recruit for a number of roles at the moment. Sorry, Deanie.
That's right. But yeah, I mean, for me, brand is the essence of what your company is. So everyone is part of that brand role within a company. Would I, if I'm setting up a team, would I set up a dedicated brand person that is only responsible for that? No, I might have someone who is kind of the go-to person about how would our brand talk about this, but then I'd still expect that to be part of everyone in marketing's role. So for me, I mean, one of my other big things is around what's happened in marketing over recent years is this kind of focus on digital is one strand of marketing and everything else is another strand of marketing, and they're two separate things and they don't talk to each other. No, they're not. It's just a channel. So for me, the brand is the messaging foghorn by which you want to communicate, and your marketing team communicates that out. And the internal comms brings the rest of the team along that communication channel with you. So for me, I don't think it should be I mean, you might have a creative person that is responsible for developing how that brand delivers through your campaigns. That would be a much more important role to me than having a standalone brand role. But other people might disagree with me.
I think it's a really interesting point. I think I won't say whether I think there should be, I'm not the best person to advise whether there should be a separate brand person or not. From a recruitment perspective, what I find interesting though, and what I think gives a good sense check on the power of, or the importance of someone's brand in a property-led organization, is have a look at job descriptions that get put out there or adverts. I mean, sometimes you're lucky if you get one bullet point about why us, why work for us, why are we a better business than, you know, someone else down the road. And yet some are going really, really forward thinking with the way that they look at engaging with talent, how they present themselves as a business. They put 2 pages just talking about all the kind of things that they're trying to achieve and the business growth plans, and really trying to tap into what I think audiences are actually looking to get when they first engage with a potential new business for a job opportunity. So I think it's a great way to benchmark where you're at in life, is what you think your brand stands for, but actually what are you putting out there on stuff like a JD, because it often gets sort of just brought out whenever there's a role for an accommodation manager. But are people actually looking at the tone of voice, the messaging, what's getting sent out to that market, which I think is quite an interesting debate, really.
We're just doing an internal survey for one of our clients to ask those exact questions. But again, it's so intrinsically linked with internal comms, brand, and company values, and everything that goes alongside it. And you'll probably see this from the other side, Matt, when people put loads of promises out there about their brand and their values, and then potentially don't deliver at the same time. But I wonder how many marketeers are involved with that brand message that goes on those job descriptions.
I would say very little, based on the evidence that I've seen. I mean, I would go further and I'll give one example, because I did a bit of it's part of a consultancy work for a build to rent, fund that invested in build to rent. I had a look at a couple of operating platforms and how they are putting vacancies out there. And even some of the preset questions that are going on the website to allegedly entice people in, you're asked stuff like, how soon can you start a role? What's your current salary? And that's kind of about it. There's no engagement, and there's no real kind of like presentation of them as a business and why you should look to work for them. It's what can you do for us? And I know we're not talking about the residents here, but it's all of that tone of voice that can turn people off very quickly when engaging with your brand for the first time. That was my first experience, logging on a website, trying to apply for a resident service associate. And the only thing I'm greeted with is, where am I based? How much money do I want? And when can I start? That to me isn't really about engaging with your target market. So yeah, that's one anecdote I've got on that subject, really.
Fantastic. We've got another brand question actually that's just come in, which was around, do you believe that brands should sit within the relevant country they're operating in? As a global company, we have a team based in another country working on our brand, but it can sometimes be out of touch with the market we operate in. Anyone want to take that? Who's working in?
Tara, this feels like it's for you.
It sounds like you.
I actually was going to answer this. I suppose, as I mentioned at the start of this, I head up our UK and Irish assets for Aparto, but we have a marketing manager that sits in Italy and Spain who looks after those residents and the mobilisation of the residences. I think what's really important from a brand perspective, that there are guidelines set out. Yes, of course, something mightn't work in one country that might work in another, but I think it's very important that from the start that they know what the brand guidelines is. I know Sarah, you mentioned about tone of voice. That is so important, because at the end of the day, it's one brand. You are promoting that one brand, and it needs to align with obviously what the brand guidelines and the values are. Yes, it might be slightly different, but I think tone of voice is so important. Really making sure that the mission is, and the brand DNA is set out at the start, and that those 3 or 4 key values that they're also set out at the start. So yes, I think what's really important, that there should be that brand, I suppose, guardian in each country, but it might slightly differ. So I think definitely setting out those guidelines are key.
Yeah, I used to work for GSA, and I headed up at various different times, global, EMEA, Europe. It changed, and it changed as well with how that was kind of managed as well. I agree with Tara. I think that you haven't really got a brand unless it's a consistent message across it all. But the way that it's executed is very different depending on which country you're in. Your demographic is going to be very different. Your language,
your product, your actual product as well.
Yeah, the nuances, and I remember having a conversation once about size of beds. That differs depending which country you're in, and when we're talking about a standard bed in one country, that's not the same in another, which means that your Q&As about bedding and what to bring are completely different. So, and you will only know that if you've got someone on the ground with that insight. So yeah, it's and again, it's communications, isn't it? It's having those eyes and ears on the ground that can bring that insight, but having one person keeping an eye that the brand is being consistent and executed in a authentic way.
And I think the other thing, sorry, I was going to say the other thing about brand is that it's important, again, to have that person at that senior level. When you're growing a business, you need to be able to know that that brand is going to develop with the product you're acquiring or growing or developing. And if it isn't, then it's okay to develop your brand and make it, it shouldn't be difficult for your brand to operate within your product. And unless you've got someone looking at the things you're acquiring or developing or growing to making sure that there isn't any concerns there or issues, is really important, because it shouldn't be difficult. It should be part of who you are.
Brilliant. Thank you. So we've got 3 minutes left, so I think we're probably going to have to kind of wrap things up. It has flown. Anyway, so from me, I'm going to say thanks so much to all our guests and for inviting me to be host as well. And like we said at the beginning, if you want the survey results and the final write-up, do sign up for the Property Marketing Strategists newsletter, which will be on their website. And they will also be sharing a recording of this session post-event as well. So please do share that. And your next event is on the Tuesday, the 8th of March, isn't it? International Women's Day.
10th of March. We've had to shift things around for our panelists, but it's a special on International Women's Day in March. So we're really looking forward to that, and hope that everybody will tune in. I'll pass over to Deenie, who's going to do the thank yous.
Yep, and just want to say a big thank you, Ayo. It's been amazing having you on, and I think Sarah and I both enjoyed answering questions. So. And sorry if we answered too many, but thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
And thank you also to Matt and Tara. You've been brilliant guests. Thank you very much. And also thank you, Aparto, for sponsoring, because it's really important that our sponsors enable this to happen, and we think it's really valued by our audience. So thank you very much. And I think we've said everything else. I think if you want to get copies of the results, that we are working on them, they're coming out soon. So email us or sign up via our website and you can be the first to get that. And do come and join us on March the 10th, where we've got a great panel. We've got Sarah Hayford from the Land Collective, Sally Day from Saltorian Marketing, Nicola Jones from Gleeds, and Rob Moyle from Collegiate. So yeah, talking all things about women on International Women's Day. So, and thank you all our audience for joining us, and for your engagement in our chat and questions. It's great to have you, and we hope to see you all next time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.